Dawn never came easy to the town of Coldwater. It rose slow from the white earth, as if the light itself hesitated to touch the frozen roofs and shuttered doors. The snow had fallen all night, whispering against windows, soft as secrets people didn't want to tell. By morning, the world was buried, fences half swallowed, wagons turned to humps of white, and the air so cold it made sound crack like glass. Through it walked a woman alone, her shawl the color of rust and her breath silver in the wind. Tala kept her eyes low, basket held tight against her chest. She had learned to move like wind over snow, seen, but never stopping long enough for judgment to land. The church bell didn't ring anymore since the preacher died last spring, but Coldwater didn't need bells to summon gossip. The sound of Tala's boots was enough. She's the one who refused old Granger twice. She won't take a man, but she'll cook for them all the same. Pretty face gone proud. The words followed her like hungry dogs. Tala had once tried to explain herself long ago. That she'd seen marriage turn kind women to ash, that she'd buried more hope than most ever found. But words only fed the fire, so now she let the silence speak for her. She stepped into the tavern, a wave of warmth and tobacco smoke rushing to meet her. Mary Lou, the barkeep, looked up from her counter, red hair pinned high, hands thick from years of lifting barrels and tempers alike. "You're late," Mary said, though her tone softened when she saw Tala's frozen fingers. "Storm's cruel this morning." "I had to walk," Tala murmured. The mule slipped. Mary nodded and set a few coins on the counter. "Payment for the week's stew. You keep feedin' half this town, they'll talk less." Tala's lips lifted faintly. "They'll only find new things to say." From a corner table came a low chuckle, deep and unhurried. Tala didn't look at first. She didn't have to. The sound belonged to someone who never hurried words because he wasn't afraid of silence. Cole Henshaw. He sat alone with his coffee, hat resting on his knee, shoulders broad beneath a wool coat dusted white at the edges. Half settler, half Apache, and in Coldwater, that meant belonging to no one. His eyes were dark, quiet lakes that caught everything without ripple or rush. When Tala finally turned, their eyes met through the tavern smoke. He nodded once, the gesture slow, polite, but it struck through her like warmth finding skin gone too long cold. Mary followed her gaze and smirked. "Don't stare too long. That one's made of stone and storm both." "I wasn't staring," Tala said, though she felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She gathered her basket and stepped back into the cold, the tavern door closing behind her like the end of a brief, safe dream. The snow swallowed sound again, her footprints the only proof she existed. At the edge of town, near the general store, Cole's horse stood tethered by the rail, steam rising from its flanks. Cole was there too, tightening a rope, head bowed against the wind. She almost passed by, but her boot caught a hidden rock under the snow, and the basket tumbled. The stew jar shattered, broth spilling into the white. Cole knelt without a word, gathering the cloth-wrapped loaves and broken pieces. His gloves were off, his hands large, rough from ranch work, careful as they brushed the shards aside. "You'll cut yourself," Tala said softly. He looked up. "Then I'll bleed on bread instead of snow." It was the first time anyone had answered her in kindness without pity. For a heartbeat, the wind paused, as if listening too. He straightened, handed her what he'd saved. "You cook for Mary Lou's place, don't you?" She nodded, unsure whether to thank him or turn away. "I could use someone like that," he said. "Hands that know the fire, not just the knife." Tala blinked. "For what?" "My ranch is too far for town meals. Men get thin and mean without food. You'd have pay, a stove, and quiet." She hesitated. I don't marry." Cole's brow lifted, a faint smile ghosting at the corner of his mouth. "Didn't ask you to." Her heart beat faster than the wind. There was no jest in his tone, no hunger, only plain truth. The snow hissed around them, and she felt suddenly lighter, like something long chained inside her had been acknowledged. Still, she gathered her things quickly. "You should find someone else." He nodded once. "All right. But you'll freeze out here come nightfall." She turned, walking toward the woods beyond town, where the small cabin she rented sat crooked against the slope. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of him mounting his horse, the jingle of reins. When she dared glance back, he was already riding into the white distance, the snow swallowing him whole. By evening, Tala lit her small stove, the flame flickering weak and low. The cabin walls creaked under wind. Beside her sat little Sparrow, the orphan girl who rarely spoke. Her thin arms wrapped around a blanket as she watched Tala stir the pot. "You're sad again," Sparrow said suddenly. Tala smiled faintly. "No, just tired." "You looked at that man like you knew him before." Tala froze. "Sometimes a face feels like a place you've been," she whispered. "Even if you never set foot there." Outside, a coyote howled. Inside, the soup bubbled, rich with the last of the salt pork. Tala poured some for Sparrow, her own appetite gone. The girl ate in silence, eyes bright with gratitude. Later, when the fire dimmed, Tala sat alone, watching her reflection shimmer in the kettle's lid. She saw the woman everyone judged, neither wife nor widow, neither Apache nor settler, caught between worlds like snow that refused to melt or fall. She thought of Cole's words, simple and unbending. "Didn't ask you to." There was something in that refusal, not dismissal, but respect. In a land where men took what they wanted, he'd offered nothing but space. And in that space, she'd felt the dangerous whisper of wanting to stay. The storm grew harder through the night. The wind howled down the chimney, cold pushing through every crack. Tala wrapped herself tighter, tried to sleep, but the image of him on horseback haunted her. Tall, silent, vanishing into snow like a figure carved from legend. By morning, the road to town was gone, buried under drifts. The world outside looked erased. Sparrow coughed softly beside her. Tala opened the door and saw nothing but white. In the distance, faint and slow, came the echo of hooves. She stepped out onto the porch, shawl drawn tight, snow cutting at her face. Through the blur she saw a dark shape approach. A horse pushing through the storm, a man hunched low, leading a second mule laden with supplies. Cole dismounted, breath steaming, frost rimed in his hair. "Road's gone," he said, voice muffled by snow. "You won't make it to town till spring's thaw. I figured you'd need wood and flour." Tala stared, unable to speak. He tied the mule's lead to her porch rail and turned to leave. "You can't just leave that," she managed. "I can," he said, meeting her eyes. "Or you can take it as an offer. Come cook at my place instead. Safer there." Wind screamed between them, snow swirling in eddies. She looked past him at the endless white horizon. Nowhere to go, nothing but cold and judgment waiting. Her voice barely carried over the storm. "I said I don't marry." He nodded once, not moving. "Then don't. Just cook." He turned, walking back toward his horse. She watched him go, heart thudding with something she couldn't name. When he disappeared into the storm again, Tala stood in the doorway long after, the mule snorting softly beside her. Inside, Sparrow whispered, "Are we going?" Tala looked down at her scarred hands, the hands that had known fire and hunger both. Then she lifted her face toward the white wind, eyes bright and uncertain. The storm swallowed her answer, but in that silence a decision had already begun. The path to Cole's ranch was more whisper than road, buried under the same snow that once frightened her. Tala followed behind the mule he had left, its hooves pressing uncertain prints into the white silence. Beside her, little Sparrow clung to her shawl, the girl's small frame shaking with cold. The storm had eased into quiet flurries now, but the sky still hung low, heavy with unfinished snow. The world felt erased. No town, no gossip, no past, just the slow crunch of steps toward something neither of them could yet name. By the time the cabin came into view, dusk had fallen. It stood like a dark mark against the silvered plain. Logs stacked tight, smoke rising faint from a crooked chimney. A lone lantern glowed in the window, steady as a heartbeat. Tala hesitated at the threshold. Something about that light unnerved her. It looked too much like belonging. Cole opened the door before she could knock. The glow of the hearth fell over his broad frame, his hair damp from melted snow. He said nothing at first, only took the reins from her hand and led the mule toward the barn. When he returned, he motioned her inside. "You'll freeze out here." The warmth of the cabin was almost painful. Fire crackled in the stone hearth, the air rich with the smell of pine and smoke. Everything inside was simple. A long wooden table, rough-hewn shelves lined with tin plates, a bed of furs in the corner. It was a place built by silence and necessity. "You can use that stove," Cole said, nodding toward the iron range. "Water's from the barrel by the wall. Wood stacked near the door. The hands come by twice a week. I'm gone most days." Tala set down her basket, still half full of grain and dried beans. "You don't speak much," she said after a pause. "Don't need to," he replied, stirring the fire. "Talk wastes heat." She almost smiled. "Then I'll save my words." Sparrow wandered near the hearth, holding her hands out to the flame. Cole noticed her shiver, and fetched a wool blanket from the shelf. "She yours?" Tala shook her head. "No. She followed me when her mother died. No one wanted her." Cole draped the blanket over the girl's shoulders, his movements careful, almost reverent. "Then she's yours enough." That night, the wind clawed at the shutters, but inside the cabin, time softened. Tala boiled soup, its scent filling the air, wild herbs, salt, and something faintly sweet from the cornmeal she'd found. Cole ate little, his eyes watching the fire more than the bowl, but he said, "Haven't tasted something like this in years." Tala didn't answer. Compliments felt dangerous, like thaw beneath thin ice. The days that followed settled into quiet rhythm. She cooked, cleaned, mended shirts by the fire. Cole split wood, fixed fences buried in snow, brought in game when he could. He left early, returned late, and always ate what she made without a word of complaint. When she rose before dawn, she'd find the woodpile already replenished, as though the night itself had done the work. When the stove sputtered, he'd appear with a new bucket of coals. He never intruded, never touched her, only moved through the cabin like a shadow that meant safety instead of threat. One morning as she kneaded dough, Sparrow whispered, "He watches you." Tala looked up sharply. "Don't start." "Not like others do," the girl insisted. "Like he's afraid to blink." Tala turned back to the dough, pressing harder. "Men see what they want. He just sees I can cook." But when the door opened later and Cole entered, brushing snow from his coat, Tala felt her pulse rise. His presence filled the small space too easily, the quiet authority of a man who didn't need to prove his strength. He placed a wrapped parcel on the table. For the girl. Inside was a pair of small leather boots, perfectly stitched. Sparrow gasped, clutching them to her chest. Tala blinked at the gift, unsure whether to thank him or protest. "She'll outgrow them by next winter," he said simply. "Better she wears them warm than barefoot proud." That night when he returned from tending the horses, Tala waited with coffee on the table, weak but hot. "For thanks," she said softly. He accepted it without smile or ceremony, and they sat in companionable silence, the fire painting gold light over the rough timber walls. Outside, the wind began to rise again. The shutters rattled. Tala checked the latch, but a sudden gust forced the door open with a cry. Snow spilled across the floor like cold breath. Cole rose instantly, pulling the door shut and bracing it with his shoulder until the storm's howl dulled. "You'll not see the town for a week," he said. "I've nowhere there I'm missed," she murmured. He looked at her, long and level. "Maybe that's the blessing." Later that evening, while stirring stew, Tala brushed her wrist against the stove's iron edge. The burn was sharp, sudden. She gasped, dropping the spoon. Cole was beside her before she could move, his calloused hand catching hers gently. He fetched a rag, dipped it in cold water, and wrapped the wound without a word. His head bowed low, close enough she could see the faint gray in his hair, the line of an old scar across his jaw. "You should be more careful," he said quietly. "So should you," she replied, meaning more than burns. He met her eyes, something flickering there. Grief, maybe, or understanding too deep to name. Then he stepped back, letting go as if touch itself were sacred. After he'd gone outside again, Tala sat by the fire, her hand throbbing under the cloth. Sparrow had fallen asleep, her small body curled beneath the blanket. Tala stared at the flames and felt something uncoil inside her. Not love yet, but the dangerous beginning of trust. By the 5th day, the storm had buried the world again. The wind screamed over the roof, snow driving sideways across the plains. Cole moved between barn and cabin, shoulders white with frost. Tala watched from the window, breath fogging the glass. Each time he passed, she saw how the cold bit his skin but never slowed him. When night came, she found herself waiting for the sound of his boots. When it finally came, slow, heavy steps on wood, she felt relief like warmth breaking through frost. He entered, shaking the cold from his coat. "Cattle are safe. Roof's holding." She nodded, handing him a bowl of stew. "Eat while it's hot." He did in silence. When he finished, he said softly, "Storm's a hard thing. Teaches what endures." Tala's gaze met his. "And what breaks?" Their eyes held a moment too long. Then she rose, busying her hands with the dishes, heart thundering for reasons she refused to name. Outside, the wind howled like the voice of every ghost she'd buried. But for the first time in years, Tala felt no fear of what storms could take, only of what they might leave behind. When she finally went to rest, she caught sight of Cole by the window, standing watch as snow piled high against the glass. His silhouette glowed in the lantern light, a guardian carved from silence. And as she closed her eyes, she heard him murmur to the night, barely audible, "You can stay as long as you need." The storm answered with a low, endless moan, carrying the words into the dark, a promise half swallowed by the wind, but enough to make her dream of something she'd forgotten could exist. By the time spring crawled back to Coldwater, the snow had turned to glassy mud, and the wind no longer bit, only whispered. The world seemed gentler, but Tala knew better. The thaw had a way of uncovering what winter tried to bury. She and Little Sparrow stood in the yard of Cole's ranch as the last drifts melted into dark veins along the fence. Smoke lifted steady from the chimney. The air smelled of pine sap and new soil. Tala wiped her hands on her apron, her palms red from kneading dough. For months she had cooked, mended and cleaned, and though the quiet had settled around her like a shawl, it was not peace. It was a waiting kind of silence, like the breath before judgment. Cole came from the barn, leading a horse slick with thawed sweat. He was bare-armed, the sunlight catching the old scars that wound across his forearms. Sparrow ran to him, her laughter slicing through the calm. "You look like a bear," she said, reaching for his sleeve. He grinned faintly, ruffling her hair. "A hungry one. Tell your cook I'll be needin' that stew soon." Tala pretended to scowl. "You've already eaten more this winter than my stove can forgive." "Then it's a merciful stove," he said, eyes lingering on her face a moment too long. It had been like that lately, brief glances, half-smiles, the quiet warmth that moved between them like unseen fire. Tala felt it every time his footsteps crossed the porch. But she also felt the weight of it, the eyes that would follow if she forgot herself. She tried to ignore the gossip that drifted up the road like smoke, but even silence couldn't keep words from finding her. The ranch hands spoke softly when she brought them food, as though politeness could hide what they implied. Women from town would come for bread and leave with smirks. By mid-April, the gossip had a pulse of its own. "She's living under his roof. No preacher's paper between 'em. Apache blood in both, no wonder." Mary Lou brought the whispers when she came one evening for stew. She arrived with her shawl pulled tight, her eyes darting toward the barn before she entered. "You ought to come into town soon," she said, setting down a jar for soup. "Let folks see you ain't hiding." Tala ladled stew into the jar. "I've nothing to hide." "That's not how they'll tell it," Mary murmured. "They say you've bewitched him. That you stay up here because he won't let you go." Tala's hands froze over the pot. "He lets me go every day. It's the world that won't have me." Mary looked at her then, truly looked, and sighed. "You're a braver woman than most. But Coldwater's memory is longer than its mercy. Be careful what peace you think you found." After Mary left, Tala sat by the fire, unable to eat. Cole returned late, smelling of cedar and horse sweat. He noticed her quietness but didn't pry. Instead, he poured coffee and sat beside her. "What's on your mind?" he asked finally. "The town," she said. They talk like my living here's a sin. He nodded slowly. They talked the same when my mother lived with my father. Said she was unholy, half blood and half curse. He buried their talk with hard work and never once apologized for loving her. Tala's throat tightened. And you? Did you ever forgive them? He stared into the fire. I learned not to need to. That night, Tala couldn't sleep. Sparrow snored softly in her bedroll, the moonlight pale through the window. Tala stood by the curtain, looking out over the silver fields. She thought of the church bells that never rang for her people, of the faces that turned away when she passed. Cole's kindness felt too large to be safe. When morning came, she resolved to go to town. The road was thick with mud and gossip. Every face she met carried a question they didn't dare voice. She walked with her head high, Sparrow trailing behind like a shadow in a too big shawl. The smell of yeast and tobacco filled the air as they neared the tavern. Inside, the same old crowd sat around the tables. Farmhands, shopkeepers, men too tired or too cruel to mind their own. Conversations dulled when she entered. Even Mary Lou paused mid-sentence. Tala approached the counter. I brought bread, she said, setting down the basket. Mary glanced toward the men. You shouldn't have come alone. I'm not alone, Tala said. Sparrow stood close, gripping her skirt. The nearest man snorted. No, she's got her little tribe now. The room filled with quiet laughter. Tala's hands trembled, but her voice did not. You all eat my food, she said evenly. Seems strange to mock the hands that feed you. The laughter died quickly. Then a deeper voice spoke from the doorway. She's right. Cole stood there, snow still clinging to his boots though the day was warm. The tavern went still. He walked to the counter, coins jingling in his gloved hand. Her bread fed half your children this winter. Her stew kept your old ones breathing. If she's not welcome, neither am I. Mary Lou's eyes flicked between them, worry and admiration battling on her face. Old man Barrow, the storekeeper, cleared his throat. We don't mean harm, Henshaw. It's just, folk notice things. Cole laid the coins down hard enough to rattle the glasses. Then let him notice kindness for once. He turned to Tala. Ready? She hesitated, shame burning under the pride his words lit in her. Then she nodded, and together they stepped out into the sunlight. Outside, the air felt raw but clean. Cole didn't speak until they were halfway home. They can talk all they want, he said. Doesn't change what's true. Tala stared at the horizon, her hands tightening around her shawl. Truth doesn't feed people's hearts. Gossip does. He gave a faint smile. Then let them starve. For days after, the town buzzed like hornets. Some said he'd proposed, others that he'd lost his mind. But Cole didn't seem to care. He worked the land, fixed the fences, and left the talking to the wind. Tala, though, felt the ache of it. The kindness of the man was one thing. The burden of being the reason for his isolation was another. One evening, as they shelled beans by the fire, she finally spoke. You'll be ruined for standing with me. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. I've already been ruined by loneliness. This ain't worse. The words struck deep, half comfort, half wound. Tala looked away, blinking hard. I don't want pity. Good, he said softly. I don't give it. Silence lingered, heavy and fragile. Outside, the first frogs of spring sang in the thawed marshes. Sparrow slept near the fire, her breathing steady. Tala leaned back, her eyes on the window where the moonlight spilled like spilled milk across the sill. You should have married again, she said. You could have had someone the town approves of. I had someone once, he murmured. The earth took her back. I don't aim to replace her. But I reckon there's more than one kind of home. She turned to him, caught between gratitude and fear. His gaze was steady, not pleading, not claiming, just there, like the mountain that never moved no matter how the storm came. Before she could speak, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers trembled slightly, as if afraid of their own daring. You smell like fire and bread, he said quietly. That's all the holiness I need. Her breath caught. Then he stood, breaking the spell, and threw another log into the fire. The flames jumped, throwing gold light over his back. When he finally went to his room, Tala sat alone by the fading glow, her heart caught between terror and warmth. She touched the place where his hand had brushed, the ghost of it pulsing against her skin. Outside, the wind rose again, whispering across the plains. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the church bell, silent all winter, tolled once, a lonely sound cutting through the dusk. Tala looked toward the dark window and whispered to herself, "Some fires don't burn houses. They build them." Then, faint beneath the howl of wind, she thought she heard hoofbeats, distant, hurried, as if something was coming for them from the town. The night held its breath, waiting. The snow returned without warning. One morning the wind came down from the northern ridge like a scream, bending the pines until they moaned. By noon the sky had turned to iron, and flakes began to fall, slow at first, then furious, as if winter had been waiting all this time to take its revenge. Tala stood at the window, hands trembling on the sill. She had known storms before, but something in this one felt different, fateful, like the land itself was holding its breath. Cole was already outside, securing the barn doors. His coat whipped behind him, a dark blur against the white. Sparrow slept on the cot by the fire, small and unaware, her breath soft as prayer. Tala wanted to call him back, to tell him the cattle weren't worth it, but she knew how men were with their duty, how they'd fight the sky itself before yielding to fear. When dusk came, he had not returned. The snow was falling sideways now, a wall of white swallowing the world. The wind howled across the plains, rattling the roof, shaking the windows until they sang with pain. Tala fed the fire and waited. An hour passed, then another. Every gust made her flinch. At last she could bear it no longer. She wrapped herself in her shawl, pulled on Cole's spare coat, and lit a lantern. The door groaned open into a world unrecognizable. The air cut like glass, snow clung to her lashes, blinding her. Still, she stepped into it. She followed the fence line, one hand brushing the frozen posts, each step sinking to her knees. The storm screamed in her ears, drowning thought. She called his name once, twice, her voice lost to the wind. Then, through the blinding white, she saw a shape, a dark mound half buried near the creek bed. "Cole!" she cried, falling to her knees beside him. His horse was gone. He lay on his side, one arm pinned beneath a fallen tree branch. Snow crusted his beard. His skin was as pale as the drift beneath him. She dropped the lantern and clawed at the branch, her fingers numb and bleeding. When it finally rolled away, he groaned faintly, eyes fluttering open. "Tala!" His voice was cracked, rough as gravel. "You fool!" she gasped, pulling him upright. "You'll die out here." "Had to get the herd in." She pressed her forehead to his. "The herd can freeze. I won't lose you too." He smiled faintly, teeth chattering. "Didn't know you cared." "Don't make me prove it," she said, and hooked her arm under his. Together they stumbled through the drifts, her legs burning, his weight dragging her down with every step. The wind tore at them like claws. Twice she fell, once nearly losing the lantern flame, but she kept going, half dragging, half carrying him, guided only by the faint glow of the cabin through the storm. By the time they reached the porch, her limbs were lead. She kicked open the door, pulling him inside. The warmth hit them like mercy. Sparrow bolted upright, eyes wide. "Mama, Tala." "Water, quick!" Tala rasped, lowering Cole to the rug near the fire. His lips were blue, his hands stiff as carved wood. She tore off his coat, pressed warm cloths to his skin, forced sips of broth between his teeth. He coughed weakly, the sound painful but alive. "Why'd you come?" he whispered when strength returned enough for words. "Because I can't cook for ghosts." He laughed once, a low, broken sound that still managed to fill the room. The storm roared outside, battering the walls like a living thing. Inside, the fire crackled, the air trembling with heat and heartbeat. Tala sat beside him, wiping his face, her burned hand shaking. "You saved me," he said. "You would have done the same." "Maybe," he murmured. "But you'd have made more sense while doing it." Her lips curved faintly. "Sense is for people who've never lost." Silence settled then, heavy and sacred. Sparrow curled back under her blanket, the rhythm of her breathing steady. Tala sat close enough to feel Cole's warmth returning. The storm's howl softened, turning to a deep, endless hum. "Cole," she said at last. "Why do you keep helping me? The town hates me enough. You'll be next." He opened his eyes slowly. "I told you once, I was ruined by loneliness. You think gossip can break what's already broken?" She looked into his face, the lines of exhaustion, the faint smile at the corner of his mouth, and something inside her gave way. For years she'd believed love was a chain. But here in this tiny cabin, surrounded by the breath of a dying storm, she realized it could be a shelter too. He reached for her hand. His fingers were warm again, calloused and sure. "Marry me, cook or not. I've waited my whole life for you." She froze, tears pricking her eyes. "Don't joke." "I'm not," he said, voice steady now. "I buried one storm years ago. I won't let this one take what I've found." Her throat ached. She looked down at their joined hands, at the burned scar across her wrist, at the roughness of his palm against hers. "I can't promise more than what I am," she whispered. "Good," he said. "That's all I ever wanted." Outside, the wind shifted. The storm began to break, clouds thinning to reveal faint bands of dawn. She could see light returning through the frosted window, soft and golden. When morning came, Cole managed to stand, weak but alive. He stepped outside into the quiet aftermath. Snow stretched unbroken to the horizon, glittering under a newborn sun. Tala followed, wrapping her shawl tighter, Sparrow clutching her hand. Cole turned to her, his breath white in the cold. "Looks like the world's been washed clean," he said. "Or buried again," she murmured. He smiled. "Then we'll dig our way out together." In the weeks that followed, the story spread through town like wind over prairie grass. They said the storm had nearly taken him, that she had dragged him home through death itself. Some still called her cursed, others called her brave. But Cole never spoke of it. He simply opened his ranch gates one morning and invited every hungry soul in Coldwater to eat. Mary Lou came first, her apron dusted with flour, followed by Old Man Barrow with a sack of salt. Even the men who had mocked Tala months before stood awkwardly by the table as she ladled stew into bowls. No one dared meet her eyes until Cole raised his cup and said, "To the woman who fed us all." The silence that followed was deep and bright as snow. Then Barrow bowed his head and said softly, "To her." That night, as the sun bled red over the ridges, Tala stood on the porch beside Cole. The air smelled of smoke and cedar, the sky wide and forgiving. "Do you still think I should have found someone the town approves of?" he asked. She leaned against his shoulder, watching Sparrow chase the last light. "No," she said quietly. "You found someone the storm approved of." He laughed, wrapping an arm around her. "That's enough blessing for me." The wind stirred again, gentle this time, brushing her hair across his face. For once, the sound no longer carried sorrow, it carried peace. And somewhere beyond the hills, thunder rolled faintly, not of another storm, but of something vast and alive, reminding her that sometimes love does not arrive as sunshine. Sometimes it comes howling through the cold, asking only who will still be standing when the snow clears.